oftentimes it's assumed that the scientific method is a monolithic entity, that it's always the same everywhere, and there's this kind of rigor in the scientific method. And the general formula, of coming up with a hypothesis and doing an experiment to evaluate the hypothesis and collecting the results and evaluating the results and reformulating the hypothesis in light of the results. And that obviously is a very reliable through line for empirical investigations into the nature of reality and the phenomena that we can observe. But what you actually find is that the closer you look at the various fields of science, the more you realize that the scientific method varies dramatically depending on the actual requirements of the field of knowledge that's being investigated. And psychology is a really great example of this. You were saying behaviorism is one of the most evidence-based sort of approaches, and then that's one of the reasons it gets a lot of funding, which I think is astute. The notion of funding and what's taught in the universities, I think that's extremely illuminating because it dictates a great deal of what we would normally think of as scientific prestige that gets afforded to a theory. But it's interesting to note that the vast majority of psychological thinking is not empirical, barely even accessible to empirical methods in that way. And certainly it's not like we usually think of science as, when I was talking before about like excluding any extraneous factors, and one of the ways that we usually do that is sort of by marginalizing the subject, right? And making everything as subject independent as possible, which in the context of psychology is just not possible. But also the standards of evidence that you find in various fields of science differ quite dramatically. If you compare sort of physics to history to medicine and to biology, in some cases you sort of see that there needs to be significant repeatability in order for something to be recognized as a real phenomenon. Whereas, if it's something, for instance, in medicine, right? A case study is much more influential in the context of medicine. But what I mean by a case study is like one instance or maybe two instances, sort of very minimal. But all it has to be in that case is very distinctive, something that doesn't fit into any of our prior categorizations of diseases. And then we just go, oh, look at that. There's a new disease we didn't know about.